seated. One of the hardest jobs in ancient Palestine was to be a farmer. It was a hard life. And we just heard an example today of how difficult that life can be when you're a poor farmer and you're struggling to make ends meet, and you have some grain and you think you can grow it in your field, and then your servants go out and look and say, boy, that's quite a crop. But then they look closer and they begin to realize that there are weeds there among the wheat. The weeds are called tares, T-A-R-E-S, tares. They're a particularly insidious kind of weed because they are slightly poisonous. And if you were by mistake to eat something of the tares, it would be very unpleasant. It would be bitter and could cause some sickness. The other problem with the tares is that they mimic what they are growing beside. So in this case, the tares mimicked the wheat. And so to the untrained eye, it was pretty clear that if you looked at the wheat and you think to yourself, boy, that stuff is really growing. And then you look a little closer and it becomes obvious that that's not all wheat. A lot of it is weeds. The problem is at harvest time, when the wheat finally begins to show its head above the stalk, the weeds then also show what they look like, and it looks very, very different from the wheat. All along, the weeds and the wheat look identical. But at the very end, before it's time to harvest, then you begin to realize those are not all wheat. Some of it is weeds. But by then, the damage is already done. It's too late to go into the field and strip out the weeds, because in doing so, you're going to kill the wheat as well. By that time, after maturity, the weeds of the tares, the roots of the tares, mingle around with the roots of the wheat. And to take out the weeds, you're also destroying your crop of wheat. So the owner, the head farmer, said, no, leave them alone, let them be, let them grow, and at harvest time, we'll take everything out, put them on long tables, and then our work is cut out for us that we have to separate, by root, we have to separate the weeds, the tares from the wheat. And that's going to take a long time to do. Plus, it's also very expensive. But it's the only way to save your crop of wheat at the very end. Now, none of us is going to go home and plant wheat and weeds. I mean, obviously. What's the message behind this parable? What's the message behind this little story? Well, there are lots of different applications, and throughout 21 centuries of reading this gospel, there have been many, many interpretations and applications of how this gospel can apply to us. The application that seems to me to make the most sense is that this is really a story about the church. The story is that the church is a mixed bag of good and bad. We're not all saints, but we're not all devils either. We have faults, we have problems, and some of those faults and some of those problems can come to the fore and really rock the Christian boat, so to speak. But what happens at the end of time is that the sinners are taken away from those who are trying to live gospel values, and rather than all of them being destroyed together, the sinners are taken away by God and allowed to be judged and then pushed aside. The message is two messages. Number one, be patient. Number one, be patient. Just as the owner was patient to allow the wheat to grow up with the weeds, we need to be patient too. We can see a lot of things in the church, and by the church I mean all of Christendom. We can see a lot of things that aren't quite right. We can see a lot of things that really should not be, but there they are. And what we need to do, instead of judging and instead of pointing fingers and saying, you're bad and you're bad and you're good and you're good, be patient. What the gospel is asking each one of us to do is be patient and not pass judgment. The judgment is something that is God's department. That's what God does. God judges. God evaluates. God looks at each one of us and says, yes, I approve of you coming into my kingdom, or no, I don't. So the gospel today is suggesting two virtues: mildness in not being judgmental, and patience instead of going out and just knocking heads together and saying, we got to clean this up. As we continue to celebrate this Eucharist, let's ask the Lord to give us those two virtues: the patience that God thinks we need and that we need to practice with one another, and the mildness to help one another out and not be judgmental. Amen. May God be praised.